My dear Mr. Grobman, please forgive my delay in answering your request for this tape recording, but I've been very, very busy and unable to get to this before now. Furthermore, now that I've looked at your questions, I'm not too sure that I can help you with your survey, although I shall try to do as best I can. There are very little records which I can provide because I kept none. All I have are memories, and in some instances even the dates are not clear in my mind. However, for what it's worth, here goes. I actually became a chaplain's assistant officially only after coming to Paris, which was in the winter of 1945, I believe it was. Prior to that, however, I was unofficially with the chaplaincy. At the same time, I ran a JWB club, Jewish Welfare Board club, for the GIs, Jewish GIs naturally, but all were invited. In Reims, France, this club was established under the auspices and under the jurisdiction of the Jewish Welfare Board, under the sufferance of the American Red Cross. At the same time, however, I officiated at services and helped with the conduct of the office of chaplain, and at that time in Reims, France, the first chaplain I actually worked with was Rabbi Arthur Brody. The last I heard of him, he was here in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I guess he's left there now. And he was a circuit riding chaplain. At the same time, we conducted services in for the holiday season. For the Yom Noraim, we conducted services in Reims, France, in which we had 3 services running concurrently at 3 different locations, 1 conservative, 1 Orthodox, 1 Reform. And Rabbi Brody conducted the Reform service. Chaplain Hirsch Levazer, who is now in Tel Aviv, conducted the Orthodox service, and I conducted the conservative service. Perhaps our first experience, or my first experience with the survivors of the Holocaust, was in Reims, France, because there I met the Jews who had returned to that community, and we used the facilities of the synagogue at that time. And I recall at that time a Madame Harari and her family who helped us at the club in Reims, whose wine cellar we used to hold our kosher LePesach wine for us while we were waiting for Passover. We had encounters with many of the Jews of that area. We helped in their reconstructing of their synagogue, putting in stoves for heating, putting an outdoor sukkah up, putting in outdoor toilet facilities for them as well. During this period, I was with ADSEC, Advanced Section Com Z. Also at this time, Rabbi Levazer, who was then with ADSEC, although not my immediate superior, inasmuch as I was really on detached duty to the JWB, he and I became involved in a project to provide clothing warm clothing, winter clothing, for the people in the DP camps, and through the good offices of many of the GIs who worked in the supply depot in Reims, were able to send out several 10-ton semis, loads of clothing, to the DP camps. I might say that an interesting anecdote, which would occur at approximately this time, which would be approximately November, December of 1945, was when we closed the JWB club in Reims. We at that time had in our possession at the club a Pleyel grand piano, which we had garnered from the supply depot. It had been apparently dropped off there by returning GIs who were returning from Germany back through Reims, going back to the States. And inasmuch as we had the piano in our possession at that time, and not knowing what to do with it, we gave it to the synagogue. Several months later, when we came back from Paris to pick up the wine for Pesach, we noticed that the piano was missing from the synagogue, and on inquiry were told that a Jewish family who had been taken by the Germans and who lived in Epernay had returned from the camps and had heard of this Pleyel grand piano, which was at the synagogue, and having had one of their own at one time, suspected this might be it, and were able to identify it to the satisfaction of the Jewish community. And lo and behold, the piano was theirs, and it was taken back to their home. When we moved to Paris, I had the option of moving to Paris in the chaplaincy or going to Vienna to open another JWB club, and I chose the former. And there I was under the direct supervision of Rabbi Hirsch Levasser, and also worked closely later on with Rabbi Carl Miller of Gary, Indiana, I guess was his last location here. At the same time, Aaron Dechter was there. Rabbi Aaron Dechter was there. We worked together with him, and Rabbi Jack Siegel of Detroit was there, as well as Rabbi Oscar M. Lifschultz of Chicago, who I understand retired as a colonel. Rabbi Lifschultz, of course, came in much later than the rest of them. He was one of the last ones to come in. At this time, we were involved, to answer your fifth question, in getting packages from the United States and distributing them to the survivors. And the way it was, the chaplaincy did suggest to the Jewish GI personnel that the packages could be sent from the States if they were double wrapped. By that I mean the top wrapping was sent to chaplaincy, APO, Paris, France, and we received them. And then we tore off the upper wrapping, and underneath was a second wrapping with a second address. And we took it upon ourselves to contact these people and have them come to the office in Paris and pick up these packages. As an aside, I might say that we once got into a bit of a hassle when the Postal Department of the United States Army blamed this rash of packages for the delay in mail delivery and impounded everything we had, all the packages we had, to examine them to make sure that these were not packages for the citizenry. We were warned in time of this and were able to commandeer several trucks from the civilian population of Paris. We were involved with them, as you shall soon hear, with the underground, the Jewish underground, representatives of Jewish Agency and representatives of the Haganah. And we asked them for trucks and manpower so that on a Sunday, when the non-Jews of the office were busy at church, we were able to remove most of these packages and bring them to a central location and so hide the packages which were suspect so that they were not discovered when they were examined by the military personnel who were responsible for the postal service. Needless to say, we continued our practice throughout this time. When we had a party, going back for a moment to Reims, when we had our Latke party, for example, on Hanukkah, we invited the remnants of the Jewish community to participate with us. When we had a Kiddush on Saturday, we provided the food and invited them to participate with us. So that wherever possible, we of course tried to help in some way, even if only for a little meal, the Jewish community. Now, I jump forward again to Paris and the big Seder we had. At that time, we took over one of the big restaurants, which was an army mess at that time, and they provided us with brand new dishes so that we could have a completely kosher le Pesach Seder. And we invited the army personnel or military personnel as well as the civilian personnel to participate in that Seder. In our efforts to help the Jewish community who returned, for example, to Reims, when we needed construction material or when we needed the clothing that we sent to the concentration camps, it was very, very gratifying to note that most, with few exceptions, most of the non-Jewish personnel were perfectly willing to cooperate with us. I wish I could give you names. There was one colonel I know who was in charge of the post-engineering in Reims, who helped us immeasurably and would give everything to us that we wanted with little or no prodding on our part. If I only gave him a salami once in a while from our supply in our kitchen. I can tell you once of an experience we had in Paris involving a side of beef. We were able to get beef from the ration breakdown in excess of our regularly supplied amount, because the GIs who worked in that department were always willing to give us some whenever we needed it. But it would be non-kosher meat, and in order to get kosher meat, we would take the non-kosher meat we got and exchange it on the open market for a lesser amount of kosher meat. And in that way, we're able to supply some of the groups with meat. One particular instance comes to mind when we sent a load of beef, and by a load I don't mean a heavy truckload. It was a small carrier with maybe 2 sides of beef in it, unrefrigerated, and we only hoped that it would get to its location in Marseille without spoiling. But that was the only way we could send beef to those places. Now, we had one specific experience which, and by we, I'm not using the editorial we, I mean the people involved in the office at the Majestic Hotel in Paris, myself, Rabbi Levasser, and Joe Browner, who was also an assistant at that time, who is in New York someplace, Brauner. We had been involved in smuggling arms and ammunition to the Israeli underground, or Palestinian underground at that time, the Jewish underground, in other words. And we had a contact where we would call whenever we had a supply to drop off. And the weapons would come to us from the GIs who were on their way home and who had several souvenirs to bring home with them. And inasmuch as they were only permitted one on board ship, they would drop them off with us, supposedly to return to the U.S. Army. They could have dropped them off with the Adjutant General's office if they had really wanted that to happen. But they didn't. They gave them to us. We stored them, and when we had a load, we would call our contact, who was a medical man, a doctor, a civilian doctor in some clinic. He would tell us where to drive and where to drop these off. And on one instance, when at that time we were in headquarters Western Base, when the hotel, the Majestic Hotel, was to be closed off and nobody was to leave the hotel without a pass for the item or items he was carrying. And we were caught with a big box full of ammunition and weapons. As I recall, one was even a submachine gun, nickel-plated, that had been taken from a paratroop general of the German paratroopers. We had also concurrently been collecting candy to be distributed to the young people, to the young kids. And what we did is we stacked the the guns and ammunition at the bottom of this box, put candy over the top of it, and I mean lots of it, and then covered that all with some old clothes we had, and pretended that it was light and walked down with it the day after this order came out. As a result, they were still a little bit lax about inspecting everything, and inasmuch as we were known to be in the chaplaincy, I was at that time supply sergeant for all of the chaplaincy there, so that we were well known for bringing in wine and things of that nature, which had to be used for the services. We convinced the MP on guard that we were only carrying old clothes and candy for the kids, and after a cursory look through the top, he sent us on our way, and we were able to deliver this, our almost final load of weapons, to the proper location. One other incident might be of interest to you. At one point, I was called by the Haganah and asked to meet with them because they had a problem they wanted me to solve if I could. It was just like a 007 movie, actually. They met me downstairs. They put me in a cab with the curtains drawn and drove us around for about 25 minutes or so we would be disoriented, and then took me into a bistro and presented their problem. Their problem was very simply the following. There was a convoy of Jewish refugees on their way from the concentration camps, from the DP camps, to Marseille for departure aboard a ship for illegal entrance into Israel, to Palestine. And their concern was that although they were in UNRWA trucks, UNNRA trucks, it was not with the official permission of UNRWA that they had these trucks, so that had they been stopped, UNRWA would have disavowed any knowledge of this convoy. As a result, they were concerned about passing through Paris with its high concentration of military police without getting stopped by the police. And they asked me to see what we could do about it. My plan was a very simple one, which we executed. As you may know, there is a special Army language dealing with specific abbreviations which are used when an excerpt of orders are cut, when a transcript of orders, marching orders, are cut, they're called. And although I was not conversant with this Army system of abbreviation, we scrounged through our files at our office and found a copy of orders. And then we took a typewriter home. At that time, Joe Browner and I lived in a private hotel. We took a typewriter home, took carbon paper home, took a copy of those orders home, and we constructed a copy which, if it would be examined just casually, could be interpreted as being a legitimate copy or transcript of the orders, permitting this convoy to travel from its inception in Germany through to Marseille, the point of embarkation. I am not quite certain to this day how successful these orders would have been in passing scrutiny had they come to the test. Fortunately, I had an alternative plan which helped avoid the necessity for a good test. What I did was call Sergeant Charles Goldstein. To my knowledge, he was last in Hammond, Indiana as a podiatrist. He was at that time working for CID and for the Adjutant General's office. I called Charlie and I said, Charlie, we need a motorcycle escort to greet this convoy at the outskirts of Paris and drive through Paris and let them go again at the other side of Paris. And I felt that if we had a motorcycle convoy of 2 or more MPs, nobody would stop them, or the chances of being stopped would be very slim, and they would easily get through Paris. And with his cooperation and the cooperation of his lieutenant, I think it was, Jules Dunnison, who is now in Detroit, Michigan, running a travel agency, we were able to act out this subterfuge successfully. As far as I know, those people got to Marseille and got on board those ships. You might also ask Rabbi Oscar Lifschultz about his role in gun smuggling, because he too worked with us, and then when he left for Vienna, it is my understanding he continued working with the Jewish underground in providing guns and armaments to them. All in all, I might say that although the Jewish chaplains had their hands full with the American GI, the Jewish GI as well, as far as his own problems concerning marriage over there, intermarriage over there, and the relationship between his family in the States and the family over there, most of the Jewish chaplains were very, very active, very sincere, were willing to take a certain amount of risk, and there was a certain amount of risk involved, in trying wherever possible to help the Jewish community. We even went so far in Reims as to provide some of them with sacks of coal. We had coal heating stoves in our club at Reims, and very frequently, when the Army would provide us with the coal for the club, we would put them in sacks and invite the community, or those of the community who felt so inclined, to come at night to the back door, and we would give them sacks of coal, because sometimes it was cold there and they needed the coal to heat their homes. So there were many areas in which the Jewish chaplain of that era pitched in. There were many times when he went to bat for a civilian against the army and against the other civilian authorities in the area. There were many times when he stretched a point and managed to talk somebody into giving us extra clothing or extra rations or something of that nature, just so we could again hand it to the more needy in the civilian population. I am not too sure I've been able to help you too much, but I do hope that whatever I did tell you, you can verify with others, and maybe I can verify with my story. I'm verifying somebody else's story. Thank you very much. Sorry again for being so late. This is Cantor Robert Handwerger, 7060 Ridge, Chicago, Illinois, 60645.